Andrew Ivins here with 24/7 Sports Preps to Pros. It's back and it's got a new look. No Cooper Petagna, my co-host. He is on a scouting trip over the pond in Germany. So this week we got a guest host. He's going to join me in a little bit. We're going to talk about Chris Hummer, his true freshman midseason All-America team. We're going to talk about our transfer All-America team. So we're going to get into that. Andrew Ivins here with 24/7 Sports Preps to Pros. It's back and it's got a new look. No Cooper Petagna, my co-host. He is on a dealing with some feedback there. I apologize, guys. But you know how we do it on Preps to Pros. I'm going to start off with a little juice, some big news in the world of recruiting. We got Cormani McClain, the nation's #1 ranked cornerback, the top prospect that has yet to make a college commitment in the class of 2022. He told 24/7 Sports Director of Recruiting Steve Wiltfong there on Monday night that he will be making a decision next Thursday. 3 finalists for Cormani McClain. It is Florida, his 24/7 Sports crystal ball leader, Alabama, and Miami. And with 8 days to go, guys, I like the Florida Gators here for Cormani McClain. He's only taken one visit this season, and that was to Florida in week 1 for that win over Utah. He was scheduled to take a trip to Alabama a few weeks ago. That ended up not happening. So with 8 days to go, I like the Gators here in this recruitment. We'll see what happens over the next really 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. But Billy Napier and the Florida Gators could be in line for some good news. And we'll see. Cormani, once he makes a decision, he still has a bunch of official visits left to use. He's a guy that's going to sign early and then enroll early. So whatever he announces will be one to still monitor as he could sneak into some college campuses. Moving on to another highly ranked cornerback prospects, that's Desmond Ricks, the #1 ranked corner in the class of 2024. He puts out a little bit earlier, a few hours ago, that he's got some news coming this upcoming Saturday. There's some scuttlebutt that's probably going to be a top group of schools. Some people have tossed out the idea that maybe Desmond Ricks could reclassify from 2024 to 2023. We'll see what is going on there, but I reached out to some contacts on Wednesday afternoon, and I keep hearing SEC battle for Desmond Ricks. Now, this past weekend, he was in Gainesville for Florida LSU, got a chance to see both those schools, and really, I think the Tigers and the Gators are the top 2 in his recruitment right now as he gets closer and closer to making a decision. Alabama's also involved. Miami's also involved. But LSU and Florida, I would keep an eye on them. And we'll see what Desmond Ricks announces this upcoming Saturday. I don't think it's going to be a commitment, but it could be a top group of schools. And again, it could be him potentially announcing some news that he is going to reclassify. And that's going to do it for the juice. Like I said, Cooper Petagna, he is out today, which means I'm riding solo, but I'm going to welcome in now my guest host for this show, and that is Chris Hummer. Chris, you've been busy. You just put together your true freshman midseason All-American team. I know this is something that you've been doing for a few years now. Take us through the process. How much fun was this putting together? And how hard was it to put together?
I mean, I get to listen to y'all talk about high school recruits for years and years and years. So it's always cool to actually get to cover them. I spend a lot of the summer just talking to coaches and staffers about how they see their true freshmen playing. We do a preseason true freshman All-American team. Even during the summer, I put together 100 freshmen who are going to make a difference for the 2022 season. And it's cool to see those guys ball out in a lot of cases. Earlier this year, we've seen some really outstanding true freshmen like Malachi Starks making a big difference for Georgia right away. And I think we've got a really compelling list of both future college football superstars and stars of the moment.
Right. We have the graphic for the list coming up right here. I want to start on the offensive side of the ball, and there are a lot of names that I think fans will recognize. We got a lot of SEC players on there, some future SEC players, even UConn getting a shout out with a tight end making the list. And Let's start right at the top, Chris. A.J. Swann, quarterback at Vanderbilt. He has become the Commodores starter here. Started the past 4 games, and man, it has been a brutal stretch for him. He beats Northern Illinois in his first start, and then he falls to Alabama, Ole Miss, and Georgia. I don't think anyone expected Vanderbilt to take down those guys. Chris, when I look at A.J. Swann, he's a guy that I remember from the All-American game, Under Armour All-American game last year. He was an Elite 11 finalist, a one-time Maryland commit. But when I think about Vanderbilt and quarterbacks, the question quickly becomes, hey, do they have another Jay Cutler? And I think a lot of people forget Jay Cutler spent his college years there in Nashville, actually started 45 games for Vanderbilt. So I'm not saying, hey, Swann the next Cutler, but why did he make this list and what separated him from some of the others?
Yeah, I think it's a little too early for me to say if he's going to be a multi-year NFL starter like Jay Cutler was, and maybe his reality career afterwards. That's a difficult thing to live up to if you're AJ Swann. But AJ's been excellent this year. He is somebody that Vanderbilt's been really high on all offseason. I was in Nashville earlier this summer, stopped by campus, and those around the program raved about how AJ had handled things. He actually beat out somebody for the backup job, Ken Seals, who had had the job for quite a while, or at least had started some games. Mike Wright started the season as the starter, but after about 3 weeks, AJ stepped in, and he's been really good. He's had to play Alabama and Georgia 2 of the last 3 weeks, which isn't easy, but he's held up well. He's yet to throw an interception this year. He's started for 953 yards. He's completing 61% of his passes. He's got 8 touchdowns. He gets no interceptions. He's been really steady, and I think that's all you can ask for a true freshman. And I think, as you said, with Jay Cutler starting 40-plus games in his career, I think AJ is a guy down the line, if he stays healthy, could start that many for Vanderbilt. He is definitely a building block for Clark Lee and that staff.
Oh, yeah, Chris, well, I'll say this. I mean, we have a lot of SEC fans of other schools, not Vanderbilt, that watch this show. But I think A.J. Swann, 2-3 years from now, he's going to be a bit of a household name because you're going to be used to this guy going up against him at least once a season. And I'll add, when I look at Vanderbilt and the direction Clark Lea has that program going, I think what's encouraging for A.J. Swann is what the Commodores have committed in the class of 2023. They have some pass catchers that I think could be potential game changers. Pimpton, the tight end that got committed, he was a member of my freaks list for the class of 2023. So I think Vanderbilt's trending in the right direction, and it was a smart move for the Commodores to turn things over to A.J. Swann and make him the quarterback of the future. Now moving on to some other quarterbacks that I think we thought could potentially make a run at this a few months ago. But if you look at this list of the former, top 10 ranked passers from the class of 2022, a lot of these guys haven't seen the field. And I think we can start at the top right here, Chris. Drew Aller, he got some action this past weekend in Penn State's loss to Michigan. But really, when you look at this group, there doesn't seem to be a runway or an avenue for a lot of these guys to play in 2022 and even in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that group, like DJ Uiagalelei is obviously playing really well for Clemson, but I don't think he's a guarantee to go to the NFL right away. That might mean Cade Klubnik waiting another year potentially. I think Connor Weigman's going to be the guy for A&M by the end of this year. He is their future. I think he will be on the field at some point. Ty Simpson's going to have a battle next offseason, but he's certainly not a lock to start. Devin Brown's going to have a battle with Kyle McCord. He's not a lock to start. Walker Howard's going to have a battle with Garrett Nussmeier. He's not a lock to start. You're seeing a lot of guys on that list who don't have clear paths. I'd bet my money on Weigman. I'd bet my money on Aller. But everybody else, I don't know if they're going to be playing next year.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, Drew Aller, I think a lot of Penn State fans, including producer Jesse, have been pushing for him to take over. Who knows how the rest of this season shakes out. And Chris, you mentioned an interesting one, Ty Simpson. I mean, we've seen what Jalen Milroe can do at Alabama. Not the most polished of passers. And hey, if Nick Saban wants some guy that's going to be able to throw it around the yard, I think Ty Simpson, after another offseason in that Crimson Tide offense around the program, that's going to do wonders. Let's not forget, he skipped the All-Star games last year to go ahead and start practices, bowl preparation, and help them prepare to win a national championship last last year. So Ty Simpson, a name to keep an eye on. Let's shift it over to running backs. And Chris, when I look at running backs, it kind of reminds me of the NFL right now. It seems like for first-year players, if there's one position where it's easy to get touches and make an impact, it is at running back. And at the top of the list, two of, I would say, more of the household names nationally right now, Nick Singleton and Quinshon Judkins. Just what made these guys stand out from the rest of the pack?
Well, I mean, Singleton is the best big play threat at running back in the country right now. He leads the country in carries of over 30-plus yards. I think he's second in carries of over 40-plus yards, second in carries of over 50-plus yards. He has a much-needed dose of instant offense for Penn State. He's still not getting the lion's share of carries, no pun intended there. But he's been a really big part for Penn State, and he's something they need. Like, they struggle to run the ball consistently. That offensive line has been an issue for years. That running back group has struggled to be over even 4 yards per carry, but Nick Singleton's provided that group a jolt, a much-needed one. Judkins is a bit of a surprise. He was a 3-star for us from Alabama. Ole Miss took him out of there. I thought he was going to be 3rd or 4th in that room coming the year. Not only did they add Zach Ivins to the portal, they added Ulysses Bentley, who had a really strong career at SMU, but Judkins took that backup job from the get-go, and he's been awesome. He's 11th nationally in yards. He's 5th nationally in touchdowns. He's averaging 6 yards per carry. He's a missed tackle machine. I think he's 4th nationally in missed forced tackles. He's somebody that on the GPS will hit 22.5 miles per hour and some touchdown runs. He seems to have it all. And Andrew, I know you want to talk a little bit about this. He has been a big part of an offensive shift for Lane Kiffin, adjusting to his personnel.
Yeah, I do. And I just want to point out on Judkins, I mean, you mentioned he was a 3-star for 24/7 Sports. I think he was a 3-star for everyone else in the industry. And the thing that really killed him throughout the rankings process was a 4.87 laser timed 40-yard dash. And obviously hindsight's 2020, but every time I saw this kid play 7-on-7, I thought he was a dude. I mean, am I surprised that he's making this much of an impact? Absolutely. But Chris, you brought it up. I mean, Ole Miss right now, number 3 nationally in rushing offense. And I'm pretty familiar with Lane Kiffin. He was at Florida Atlantic a few years ago. And I was telling producer Jesse, what Ole Miss is doing on the field right now reminds me a lot of what Lane Kiffin did when he was at FAU in 2018. And people will forget FAU that year, they had a 10-win season. They were 13th nationally in rushing offense. And he accomplished that behind the legs of 2 NFL running backs. Motor Singletary is now with the Buffalo Bills, and Kerith White, who had a cup of tea in the league. And I mean, if you look at Ole Miss, what they're doing right now with Judkins and Zach Ivins, who's a transfer, I think this is Lane adjusting and adapting to his personnel. And Judkins is a big reason why the Rebels are 7-0 and knocking on the college football playoff door.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the best coaches adjust. We've seen that with Nick Saban time and time again in his career. He has found a way to revamp his roster, do what he does to fit the pieces or the style of football that's happening in college. And we've seen Lane Kiffin do this. This was an offense under Matt Corral that threw the ball around the yard a lot. They played with a ton of tempo. They attacked teams vertically. This is a much different team. Ole Miss's strength coming into the year was its offensive line. They returned 4 or 5 starters. They brought in Zach Ivins, a former 5-star recruit, somebody who averaged 7 yards per carry in his career. And we've seen them adjust. This is a run-first team. Jackson Dart is asked to do quite a bit with his legs, too. That's a credit to Lane Kiffin. Chris Partridge on the other side of the ball has a top 20 defense in his first year as defensive coordinator. We've seen Ole Miss adjust its identity, and that's a huge credit to Lane Kiffin. There's a big reason why they're off to their hottest start in history after losing so much off of a New Year's 6 teams last year. The staff adjusted to what it had, and it's working out really well.
Well, Chris, I think the running backs were easy to select for this exercise. The wide receivers, a few surprises. Maybe this was a little bit more difficult than you anticipated. I think the guys you had on your preseason list, did any of them actually end up making the midseason list? One guy I wanted to highlight, T-Mac McMillan, the wide receiver at Arizona. This is a guy that I remember vividly from the opening finals. He had a background in volleyball, big kid. He's over 600 yards receiving here as a freshman. And I have some contacts out there at Arizona. They told me to watch out for Mr. McMillan, 28 catches for 470 yards and 6 touchdowns. What else did you like about this wide receiver group?
Yeah, McMillan was on our preseason list. He is somebody going into the year that I expected to have a huge effort. And I think he's actually exceeded expectations. He's the top overall recruit in Arizona history. He's somebody that they brought in to make an immediate impact, and he's been everything and more in that regard. He leads all true freshmen in yards. He leads all true freshman receivers in touchdown catches. He's not their number one receiver. That's Jacob Cowan. We might talk about him a little later. But he's a huge part of a Arizona offense that's gone from, I believe, 120th nationally into the top 30. That's because of guys like McMillan as a playmaker on the outside. And the other receiver, Dane Key, for Kentucky, is a part of a really special Kentucky true freshman group that I know we'll talk about a little bit more later. But he's had an excellent season for Kentucky and a really, really good 2022 class we saw come into Lexington.
Closing things out on offense, the offensive line, the big bodies up front. I mean, it seems like this is a position where it takes a while for guys to get and work their way onto the field. But one individual has done it very well so far, Kelvin Banks. I remember he was your true freshman of the week a few weeks ago. He's at Texas. What do we need to know about Banks?
Well, he's a big dude. Texas was very fortunate Mario Cristobal left for Miami because Kelvin was originally committed to Oregon. He was going to head to Oregon, but when that happened, Texas got another shot, and they landed him a couple days later. And he's been a day one starter for Texas, and he's had a huge year. He's allowed only one sack this season. He went one-on-one with Will Anderson for most of the game against Alabama and didn't give up a sack. He went one-on-one with Will McDonald, an All-American edge rusher for Iowa State, didn't give up a sack. He has been a steadying presence for Texas along the offensive line, and that's massive for a program that's struggled to produce NFL talent at that position for a very long time. He is a future first-round pick, and that's really good for Texas, given that they have struggled to address that position for a very long period of time. So it's been a huge one for them to land Kelvin Banks and for him to play this way.
I think the fact that Banks is having such an impact bodes well for the future of UT's offense. We talk about Quinn Ewers and what he's done. We know Arch Manning's on the way, and I said it a few weeks ago on Preps to Pros, Cedric Baxter Jr. to the number 2 ranked running back in the country. He's eventually going to make his way to Austin. I think he will be able to take over for Bijan Robinson at some point down the line. Chris, one more lineman I wanted to mention, Blake Miller at Clemson. I think what's notable here is we know Dabo Swinney is so opposed to the transfer portal. I mean, he hasn't taken anyone as a veteran rental of sorts. And the fact that if you're Clemson and you have Blake playing as a true freshman, that's got to be promising, especially with Marcus Tate, a sophomore, also in that starting 5. I mean, right? They can't miss on the offensive line. That's a position where there's a high bust rate. So the fact that got 2 young bodies getting meaningful snaps for a team that has ACC title aspirations has to be big.
Yeah, Texas has got 3 underclassmen playing along the offensive line, and it's just as big for Clemson to do so, if not more, based on what you said about Dabo Swinney's unwillingness to go in the portal. Miller hasn't been perfect. He has definitely struggled at times in pass protection, but he's been very solid, especially as a run blocker for a Clemson offensive front that tends to move the ball well on the ground. He is what people around Clemson call one of the most ready-to-play prospects they've ever seen. He is a big dude, just like country strong. He is somebody that Clemson, people around that program raved about all offseason. And while he hasn't been perfect, like this is a guy you can see starting for Clemson for 3 or 4 years. And that's what Clemson needs to do. Not only do they need to have those developmental wins that we are familiar with Dabo Swinney, they need to get some of the surprising ready-to-play guys to stick in there and build your program around. And with Blake Miller back there, guys like Will Shipley, and some young receivers in that offense, I think Clemson's offense moving forward is in really good shape.
Transitioning to the defensive side of the ball, this is another group. There's a lot of SEC flavor on it, a lot of familiar names as well. I think we got a lot of highly ranked recruits, but some unknowns. Jaheem Otis, the big, massive nose tackle for Alabama, he's right there in the trenches. Harold Perkins at linebacker, Malachi Starks, Denver Harris. Those were all big-time recruits. Riley Thompson, punter from my alma mater, FAU. We got the Aussie on there. Chris, let's start with that D-line group. I think what's kind of notable here is we spent all off season and all of the early signing period and all of February's National Signing Day talking about Texas A&M's defensive line group, and they don't get a defensive lineman, a pass rusher on the midseason true freshman list. And I know they're playing some of those guys like Shamar Stewart and Walter Nolan. So what stood out about these other guys? What got them a spot in that 4?
Well, I mean, Dion Walker and Jaheem Otis, I think, are 2 future first-round picks on the inside. They have just been incredible for Kentucky and Alabama, respectively. Dion Walker is one of the pressure leaders among all interior linemen in the country. He has been awesome for Kentucky from day one, plug-and-play starter. Jaheem is a little different. He's taken over a starting role later, but he's been extremely productive, especially as a run defender. He is a special athlete. He was over 400 pounds as a high school senior. He's down to, I believe, 360 or 350, and he just moves like a ballerina for somebody his size. He's been awesome. David Bailey is an edge rusher for us from Stanford. He's had a really good year. He's somebody Stanford had to have play well. He's one of their top recruits in a very long time. He has 17 pressures already this year. That would have almost led the team in 2021. Stanford created no pressure last year, and David Bailey has been a much-needed balm for that. And I'm curious for your thoughts on Gabe Jahmyr at Illinois. Illinois has the #1 defense in the country right now in terms of yards per play. And I know Gabe's from around your neck of the woods in Florida. He's somebody that this offseason we'd heard a little bit of buzz about, but he wasn't somebody we expected to start. So for him to have 22 tackles, lead the team with 4 sacks, and have 4 tackles for loss, that's been a pretty incredible story.
It is, and it's a surprise to me. We mentioned it in our on a Monday show, just kind of highlighting some of the freshmen that had performances. And, you know, the thing that I keep coming back to with Gabe is he was a 2-time wrestling state champion. Obviously, he knows how to transition his weight well. He can bend with some ankle flexion. And I had totally forgot about this until I did some further reading. In Tennessee, actually tried to make a late run at him. And Gabe was a former Tulane commit. Tulane, they're in the top 25. They do an excellent job of evaluating. So a guy that kind of slipped through the cracks. And I hate the term diamond in the rough, but if there ever was one, it is Gabe Jahmyr. The linebacker group, Chris, this one, some familiar names, right? Harold Perkins, we know how his recruitment went. He was going to go to Texas A&M, ends up at LSU, and Brian Kelly. But the guy I want to highlight here is Jashawn Barham at Maryland. This is a DMV kid that Mike Locksley got to stay home. Already one of the best in the Big Ten, it seems.
Yeah, if you're Mike Locksley, you were brought in for a couple of reasons, and a big one was to lock up the DMV. That is an area he's recruited historically very well in his career. He is there to create a buzz in that area, to lock down their home. I guess it's not really a state in the DMV, but that little triangle of schools there. And getting Barham is a huge thing. He's been massive for Maryland this year. He was a day 1 starter. He leads Maryland with 3 sacks. He's got 35 tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss. He's played like one of the better linebackers in the Big Ten already. And he's a building block for Mike Locksley moving forward. They obviously have one of the more explosive passing attacks in the country. But defensively, Maryland struggled to keep its personnel. They've lost some really notable recruits to the transfer portal the last couple cycles, specifically at that linebacker position. To get Barham at Maryland, to have him playing so well so early is a signal to the rest of the kids in the DMV that you can stay home and you can still make a huge impact.
Rounding things out in the secondary, I got to talk about Malachi Starks. He was your initial freshman of the week. He had that awesome interception against Oregon and the Chick-fil-A playoff. This looks like a future first rounder to me. What do you, as a non-talent evaluator, someone that doesn't do the scouting, what do you think about Malachi Starks? Because he's someone that checked every box off for us. He was #1 on my freaks list for the class of 2022, and the buzz coming out of Athens all summer long was, hey, watch out for him and watch out for Mykel Williams.
Yeah, I was told I had to have Malachi on the list when I asked somebody there. I didn't know if he would start right away, and he technically didn't for Georgia, but I was absolutely told he's a guy who's going to make a huge impact for the Bulldogs this year. I fall in love with numbers, and you had him on your freaks list, and like they don't get much more freaky than Malachi Starks. My favorite thing with him is He almost long jumped 25 feet as a junior in high school as his personal best. If you push that to the NCAA track and field meet, that would have qualified for the finals among all college track and field people. That's what type of athlete we're looking at. And Andrew, I'd be curious for your perspective here. I think he's the best freshman DB we've seen since Derek Stingley. Do you consider him in that area in terms of quality this year for Georgia?
I think so. And, we talked a few months ago after he made your list, we were trying to, label him as some NFL comp. And I don't think it really matters. But Stingley certainly is making an impact at the next level that works. Some of those other guys in there, Chris, Denver Harris, we saw him get integrated into the lineup more and more as the season's gone on. He played a lot for Texas A&M against Alabama. I just think one of my big takeaways is, man, it's hard to find some good defensive backs these days with how offenses are playing across the board in college football.
Yeah, it's really hard. There's no, if you watch Tennessee, you see those wide receiver splits, the DBs have an impossible job a lot of the time. You're putting so much space, you're putting so much conflict. There's so much for you to handle. It's a difficult job. But Denver Harris has played really well. I think he has the highest defensive grade per PFF of any Texas A&M defender this year. Opponents are completing just 36% of their passes against him. He's held up really well. He looks like the 5-star that he was. And Texas A&M's defensive class, I know they only got one player on here, but they're playing a lot. Guys like Walter Nolan have been on the field, Shamar Stewart. LT Overton's playing a ton. Chris Marshall on the other side of the ball is playing next to Evan Stewart as a starter at receiver. So this freshman class is playing. You'd like to see a little bit more success with this group as a whole, but that'll come with time. This group is loaded. Now the key, probably this offseason's holding on to them all.
Yeah, interesting to see how this group shakes out, how many of these guys pan out and are playing on Sundays one day, because we've said it when they signed. It was a generational type class. Any other takeaways, Chris, just as a whole from assembling this list? I know you mentioned Kentucky. They got, I think it was 3 names that found their way onto the midseason freshman list. And, Kentucky, I think a lot of people forget, Mark Stoops, they finished last recruiting cycle with a class that ranked 14th. That came on the heels of a 10-3 season, which included a Citrus Bowl win over Iowa. I mean, just your thoughts on Kentucky having 3 of those guys in there.
I think this represents the evolution of the Kentucky program. For a long time, this was a school that was known for development under Mark Stoops. They had a player in their program for 5 years or so. They redshirted, they started in year 4, and then they made a huge impact. But right now, for a team that had to replace a ton off of a 10-win program or a 10-win team, we're seeing guys like Dane Key and Barry and Brown at receiver make a huge impact. I think they're going to be one of the best receiver duos in the SEC for the next couple of years. They've been awesome. They've given Will Levis somebody to throw to after losing Wan'Dale Robinson. Dion Walker, who we talked about earlier, has been awesome on the inside. And then somebody like Alex Safari, who's a safety, is coming on really strong for Kentucky. He started 3 of the last 4 games, I believe. He's had really nice numbers all around. He's somebody that those in the Kentucky program really believe in. So we're seeing a Kentucky program combine development with strong recruiting and also evaluating the right strong recruits to come in who can play right away and make an impact. And I think that's the next kind of step in Kentucky's evolution under Mark Stoops. Not only are they going to be a developmental program, but they're going to win recruiting battles and have difference makers on their roster.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they get a bump from Will Levis here. And, he keeps getting mocked in the first round. And I'll just toss this in there. I love what Kentucky's doing in the class of 2023. They're currently sitting outside of the top 25, but they just had a monster recruiting weekend up in Lexington. They had Jakeem Jackson, a really good cornerback, one of my favorites in the class. He's committed to Florida, but his brother runs track for the Wildcats, so he was up there for a visit. Jeremiah Anglin, another young defensive back I like. And then Steve Wilfong, the director of recruiting, he's always in my ear about Grant Godfrey, a 4-star linebacker out of the Atlanta area. He's having as good of a senior season as anyone in the Peach State. So the arrow continues to point up for Kentucky. And I think if you're a Florida, I think if you're a Tennessee or a South Carolina, you're kind of a bit nervous about what Mark Stoops has done at UK. So let's move on over to the transfer side of this thing, right? We just went through the true freshman midseason team. I know, Chris, you had a hand a little bit in this transfer one. It's not going to be as in-depth here, but I know producer Jesse's going to get that graphic up there. A lot of names we're going to be recognized with here. You see Michael Penix at quarterback. That's a bit of a head scratcher, I think, for some. Tyler Steen, transferred from Vanderbilt. He's now at Auburn. Osiris Torrance, if you know anything about Florida football, he has played such a big role for the Gators up front. So a ton of different directions to go in. Let's start at quarterback. Michael Penix, my guy from the state of Florida. He gets the nod over Caleb Williams, which I think is going to have a lot of people raising their eyebrows. But he's had a great year. Leads the country, I believe, in passing. Chris, what have you liked out of Michael Penix?
Yeah, I think I'd probably rather have Caleb Williams too. But Michael Penix has been awesome. He's obviously reunited with Kalen DeBoer, his former offensive coordinator in Indiana, and it's been a marriage that's just sung. From the get-go. That makes sense. Michael Penix had his best season of his career in 2019 under Kalen DeBoer. And now that he's healthy for Washington, he's totally opened off that offense. That offense last year was painful to watch at times. Like, it was really tough under Jimmy Lake and his staff. And it's looked totally different this year. As you said, Michael Penix leads the country in passing yards. He's really accurate. He's completing over 67% of his passes. I think he's only thrown a couple interceptions this year, despite the frequency with which he pushes the ball deep. So Michael Penix has just reclaimed his career, I think. He is somebody that has a quirky throwing motion, I would say. I don't know what he would look like as an NFL prospect, but it's a conversation again after he was ultimately benched at Indiana. And he's one of those success stories in the portal where a change of scenery can make all the difference.
Funky. It's called being left-handed, man. It's that little southpaw.
It's funky, man. It's funky.
All right, well, if Penix was debatable, I don't think the running back selection was. Jaheem Gibbs, he has been arguably the MVP when it comes to transfers at Alabama. This is a kid that got out of Georgia Tech. I mean, it seems like every time he touches the ball, your eyes, they got to gravitate towards him. He has been awesome for them. I think he's personally running back one in the 2023 draft class. I'm surprised he's not getting included in more mock drafts, but heck, maybe I should just transition from covering high school rankings to NFL rankings. But Jaheem Gibbs, Hummer, he's a good one, right?
Yeah, I mean, he is somebody that was getting rave reviews as Alabama prepared for Georgia ahead of the national championship game. He was giving the Alabama's first team defense fits coming over from Georgia Tech during a bowl run-up, and he's been awesome since. I think what really is underrated about Jaheem Gibbs is his impact as a receiver. He is arguably Bryce Young's best receiver right now. He's one of the best pass-catching backs in the country. He sets up his blocks extremely well as a runner. He's got great vision. He's explosive. Even coming out of high school, I remember what a steal Georgia Tech got with him, and he has been everything as advertised for Alabama this year. He's been their best skill player without much question.
One other running back makes the list, Kalan Layborn at Marshall. I think what's interesting with him is he's a former five-star recruit, composite five-star All-American Bowl selection. He's at Marshall, and he wouldn't be on the field if it wasn't for Rashawn Ali kind of taking a little leave of absence. But to me, Charles Huff, the coach there, we know what they did in week 3 at Notre Dame, but he wants to model his program after what Nick Saban in Alabama does. And the fact that both those guys have transfer running backs on here is certainly interesting. But I think, Hummer, you would agree the interesting thing about him is the kind of the redemption story. Things not working out in Tallahassee. Now they are at Marshall there in West Virginia.
Yeah, he had a injury-plagued, some discipline issues at Florida State. He had a super up-and-down career, never really got going, but a change of scenery can make all the difference. Charles Huff is obviously, before he was a head coach, was one of the best running back coaches in the country. Worked with guys like Najee Harris, Saquon Barkley, and he's worked his magic with Layborn. He's run for over 100 yards in every game this season. He's been among the most productive backs in the country, and we're finally seeing that potential. I think was he a 2017 or 2018 recruit? Like, off my top of my head, I'm not 100% sure, but he's been around a long time. And for him to find this success late shows you that it's never really over for somebody as talented as Layborn. These guys, if they get in the right system or get the right opportunity, can always flash again.
We're crawling along here, so I'm going to push it to the big bodies up front. I know one guy that me and you both wanted to talk about, O'Cyrus Torrence, the offensive lineman for Florida. He's a guy that was at Louisiana with Billy Napier. Napier gets hired at UF, and he follows him over there. And Chris, as you're pointing out in the pre-production show, the Gators kind of scheme their entire offense out around this massive individual up front. So no-brainer for him to be on this list.
Yeah, absolutely. You could argue he's the best interior lineman in college football right now. Like, he makes that offense go. They run behind him, I think 60% of the time. Very successful at doing it too. He's been huge. And I think it's on Billy Napier for recognizing that he could take O'Cyrus with him and he could have that same kind of impact in the SEC. And Andrew, I'm curious, do you think a lot of other coaches who might make that G5 to P5 jump would be willing to do the same thing, or do you think it's more situational?
I think it's kind of situational. I think, if you're a group of 5 program and you hire an FCS coach, almost the expectation is, hey, they're going to come with me. Or I think it's here to stay until the NCAA figures out a way to put some parameters on it. Why wouldn't you do it? But how could the NCAA deter anyone from doing that? I mean, if you sign up to play for a coach, you should have every chance to follow him. So it's certainly interesting and kind of a trend I think we're going to see more and more of. And that's kind of been the scuttlebutt inside the coaching community, when I bring it up and I mention guys' potential names. So O'Cyrus Torrence has been certainly awesome. Flipping over to the defensive side of the ball, defensive linemen, just like with running backs, it's kind of easy for those guys to get acclimated and play early on. This group, Miami's Akeem Messidor, you were mentioning, hey, is he playing edge? Is he playing interior? He's someone that can do a little bit of everything. And I think he got chased out of West Virginia, or he left West Virginia because he wanted to play more of an edge role. Well, he's having a ton of success for the Hurricanes. Obviously, they're not off to the best start, but he has been a surprise for Mario Cristobal and those guys.
Yeah, he's been a big win for Miami. He left. He actually told me this offseason he left Miami. He left for the transfer portal because he wanted more of an opportunity to play outside, and he's done so for Miami this year. He's started a defensive end, and I think almost every game this year, and he's been ultra productive. I think he leads the team in tackles for loss and sacks. He creates a lot of pressure. He did that at West Virginia, even playing inside. I think he's a future NFL draft pick, and that was a big pickup for Miami, a bright spot in a difficult season for them for sure.
Few more defenders I want to highlight. One of them, Drew Sanders, sticking with that theme of former 5-stars that have rehabilitated their career. Drew is at Arkansas. Cooper Petagna mentions him, I think, every other week on Preps to Pros. He's been awesome. I think he's getting some national awards and recognition. Second nationally right now in sacks. But this, to me, is surprising. I did not anticipate him making this much of an impact for the Razorbacks.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm pretty familiar with Drew, being a Den Ryan guy. I live in Texas. He played a little bit of everything in high school. When he got to Alabama, he was asked to play inside linebacker eventually. He was in the same class as Will Anderson. He eventually lost that opportunity to play outside to Dallas Turner, and they've shifted him inside. I think he's found his best fit at Arkansas as a pass rusher. That's where his skill set lies. I think it's taken him some time to refine his technique to the point where he can play at this level consistently. But once he's got there, he had all the physical tools in the world. And I think he's going to be a first-round pick, or at least fight for a spot that high, because he's that athletic and he's that talented. He's got that much bend off the edge. He's one of those guys, given enough time and given the right position, that he's thrived.
One guy in the secondary that I wrote down to ask you about, USC safety Mekhi Blackmon. And I think this is a big picture question because Eric Gentry, the linebacker, he's probably a bit of a snub from this list. A guy you can make a case maybe he should have been on there. But how bad would USC's defense be if they didn't get these guys from the transfer portal? We talk about what they do on offense with Caleb Williams, Mario Williams, Jordan Addison, but on defense, really, this is a unit of mercenaries, used goods that they're getting some solid play from.
Yeah, USC's defense isn't great. I think we're 87th nationally in yards per play for USC, so that's not amazing. But if it wasn't for guys like Mekhi Blackmon, Eric Gentry, Kalen Bullock, who was a transfer the year before, Shane Lee, who came over from Alabama, this defense would be a mess. A couple of USC's best players are transfers. Had they not bolstered their 2 deep with those transfers, I don't know what USC's defense would look like. it would have been rough. So credit to Lincoln Riley for coming in and identifying weaknesses on the roster and addressing those. Obviously, that offense has been bolstered through the transfer portal as well. I think you can make an argument for several USC offensive players to be on this list as transfer All-Americans, but that defense would be lost without a paddle in the river if it wasn't for these transfers. So that's been a huge boom.
Chris, overall takeaways on this transfer list. I know you weren't as involved as you were with the freshman list, but anything that jumps out to you, maybe the rankings?
Yeah, I think there's only one member of our transfer ranking top 10 on this list, which I think could raise some eyebrows. But if you look at our top 10, Caleb Williams is having an amazing season. Quinn Ewers has been hurt, but he's been awesome for Texas, changed the way they look at things. Jordan Addison, I think partially because of the leads USC has had, hasn't had the target and volume share, but he's been awesome for the Trojans. We've had some misses, obviously, like Eli Ricks has not lived up to expectations. Jermaine Burton has not lived up for expectations for Alabama either. But our top 10 is really strong. Like Zach Evans is having a huge season for Ole Miss. Jackson Dart is a starter for Ole Miss as well. Kingsley over at BYU is their starting left tackle. He's had a really good year. So those guys are playing. That's just the thing with the transfer portal. There's so many transfer portal players right now. I think if you look at a box score every weekend, you would see 3 or 4 names pop out as transfers almost every game of the week. So there's just so many of these guys right now making a huge impact in college football. It's difficult to narrow it down just to 22.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Drew Sanders, he was at 15. Jared Verse, the Florida State pass rusher who got dinged up, he was at 21. So I do think the rankings are still somewhat accurate, but you're right. At all different levels, there's guys that have come from one school and gone to another school. And guess what? The transfer portal is not going anywhere. They've put some parameters in place where kids can't enter their names, but I do think in 2023, you talk with your college contacts, you talk with different personnel people. Everyone's still holding spaces to see what they can add this winter. And I thought, Chris, hey, why not a good idea to maybe peek ahead to the 2023 cycle and maybe take a look at some of the quarterbacks that could be on the move. I mean, again, this is probably going to be all speculation. Guys can't enter their names unless they're a graduate transfer. And so far, I think the biggest quarterback in the transfer portal is Hank Bachmeier, who was at Boise State. So I'm going to toss some other names out to here. You see them up there on the screen: Kyle McCord, Devin Brown, Hudson Card, Nick Evers, Luke Altmaier, Jacoby Criswell. I threw out here Jeff Sims, who is at Georgia Tech. You have a chance to watch him tomorrow night on TV. I think he's a very talented passer. He's a guy that's won a ton of games, but who knows what's going to happen once there's a new head coach in place there. Is anyone on this list, Chris, that jumps out to you as potential guys that could be on the move?
Yeah, I mean, I would be very surprised if Hudson Card wanted to sit behind Quinn Ewers for another year. He's shown this year when Quinn was hurt that he is a Power 5 starter. I think he's going to have a really long list of suitors. Guys like Jeff Sims and Grant Mertz will be interesting, but I think those will be more reclamation projects than anything. You always, I think, have to watch Ohio State's QB room. We obviously saw Quinn Ewers move out of there, but only one person can win that job between Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. And ultimately, they have another 5-star coming in 2024. So space is limited, and these guys want to play. So you have to watch places like Columbus. I think Cade McNamara from Michigan is certainly one to watch. He wasn't on that list, but he's going to end up somewhere with J.J. McCarthy being Michigan's starter. I think a lot of schools could do well with Cade McNamara. I think Notre Dame would have loved to add Cade McNamara midseason if they could have, despite the fact that Drew Pines played decently well since Tyler Buckner got hurt. So it's going to be another crazy offseason in the transfer portal with quarterbacks for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, man, I enjoy you pinch hitting, getting the call off waivers, getting the promotion from, I don't know. Do you have a show? I can't say you got promoted from single A to double A.
I have a DB page like you, Andrew. I can't handle it.
Well, thank you. And tell everyone how they can find your work. I mean, you're all over 24/7 Sports, but how do we follow you on social media?
Yeah, Twitter handle is Chris_Hammer. And always enjoy watching Preps to Pros, man. It's been cool being on here.
Well, I appreciate it. For Chris Hummer, for Cooper, who is overseas, for producer Jesse, I apologize for my stumblings. I've never had to host the show. Hopefully it was good enough. We got a lot of information in on there. Stay locked to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Please like, rate, and subscribe, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Hopefully Cooper will be back.